Coming up on this Friday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, I am here to discuss Gigi Jackson's timeline and the benefit of patience. I'm talking fair expectations for Zack Edy going into his rookie campaign, still lofty, and I'm also talking about my way of addressing the end of the rotation with Gigi out for the start of the regular season. It's a fun and freaky Friday on Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello. Once again, it is Friday. Got to get down on Friday. A wise philosopher once said, fun. Looking forward to the weekend. It is I, Joe Mullinax, and I am partying with you all the way through for the next 30 or so minutes here on Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for being with me. And shout out, of course, to the great, eternal, immortal Rebecca Black. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are free and available here on Locked On Grizzlies as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Thank you so much to everyone over on YouTube who keeps making that such a great part of the Locked On Grizzlies experience, despite my terrible looks. I really do appreciate that you watch us over there. But make sure you're subscribing on the audio side as well. Spotify, Apple, Amazon, literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get Locked On Grizzlies. Continue to check us out on YouTube, but check us out when you're on a walk or on a run. You're in the car on the way to work. Whatever the case might be, you're checking out Locked On Grizzlies, and it is appreciated. I am your host for this episode, Joe Mullinax. No DeMichael Cole. He is getting a well-deserved day off during this, my busy time of the year in the fall, or approaching the fall. DeMichael has been carrying the load, and he deserves a long weekend. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode. We're going to talk Grizzlies basketball, and I'm excited to be with you. And as I like to do, because I miss DeMichael when he's not here. I know you do too, dear listener, dear viewer. Nobody loves DeMichael Cole more than me, except maybe his family, right? So I miss DeMichael. I love reading his work over at the Commercial Appeal each and every time he posts an article, goes into the paper over there as the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the CA. I follow him at DeMichael C, and I check out his work, and that's going to be a guiding force for our show today. And we're going to talk more later on in the program about the big main, right, Zack Edy, and expectations of him going into the season. But first, I want to talk about an article that DeMichael posted about Gigi Jackson, young Gigi, and his foot injury. Now, you hear foot injuries, and I don't know about you, but I naturally get nervous, right? I naturally get concerned because I always think about it through the lens of a big man, right? A true big, 7'2", 300-pound guy, lots of weight being carried on that foot, lots of pressure and pounding on the hardwood as they go up and down the floor. It arguably had a hand in ending Yao Ming's career, right? A guy who was a Hall of Famer who could have been one of the greatest of all time, potentially, if he had been able to have the longer run, but he had health issues, some of which stemming into the foot. Gigi Jackson is obviously not that, right? 6'9", 215-ish pound, 19-year-old. His recovery is going to look a lot different than that of a normal big man. Gigi is not a normal big. He could argue he is not a big at all, and that is one of the reasons that DeMichael is not concerned, nor is the doctor that he spoke to about the injury. Dr. Kenneth Young, an orthopedic foot and ankle surgeon at Cedars-Sinai Kerlan-Jobe Institute, he gave clarity to DeMichael, and again, I want to give credit. Gigi Jackson's injury timeline. Foot doctor explains, why Grizzlies fans shouldn't be worried. And you should check out the entire article, but there are a couple things that I really took from it. Number one of the hardest parts of this is waiting in terms of just needing the bone to heal, right? The first step, and this is from DeMichael's article, is probably the most boring part of the process. Jackson's bone will need to heal before he moves forward in his rehab. So that is something that you really can't rush, right? You come out of the surgery, you need the actual injury to heal first before you can strengthen the things at and around the point of the injury, get back into basketball shape, get back to full basketball activities. There are processes to this, and it takes time. The doctor, good Dr. Young, is quoted as saying, basically, it's like waiting for the paint to dry. pretty boring, if I do say so myself. If you've never watched paint dry, dear listener, dear viewer, you are not in for a treat if you're following Gigi's recovery closely. It just takes time. Patience and waiting truly can be the hardest part, as Tom Petty once said. From there, it'll take 6 to 8 weeks to heal, be strong enough to withstand a load. That means towards the end of October, you should see a Gigi Jackson ramping up his load, right? Building up additional activity to where it's closer to basketball. That's what Dr. Young said. The fact that Gigi is 19 years old is a good thing here. Usually the younger you are, the faster you heal. There's nothing that has been posted or written about or spoken of that would suggest that Gigi is going to have any difficulty coming back from this. He, again, does not have the frame of a traditional big or a big in general, where if this happened to Zack Edy, maybe you're a little bit more nervous long term. But Gigi's body, the way that he plays the game, the two were not the same, right? His recovery is going to look different from that of somebody that maybe would have a wear and tear version of this injury like a big. DeMichael writes that Dr. Young thinks that 3 months is a pretty safe number. And that was interesting to me. And that's the other main focus. Again, patience is one of the main focuses coming out of DeMichael's piece. But another major piece is the patience aspect in terms of the longer length of time. 3 months is a pretty safe number. He's just got to be able to get into basketball shape physically and mentally. Whether he's back to full expectations of what the fans and coaches expect, that might be a different number. Especially the coaches aspect and especially the medical staff aspect. If you've been following this team for an extended period of time, or if you're new to the Grizzlies, first off, if you're welcome to the Grizzlies, hello, welcome, glad you're here. The Grizzlies are going to be hesitant with this injury. I think when the report first came out, I said, see you at Christmas, Gigi. That is my expectation for a couple of reasons. And DeMichael mentioned them both in his piece. Number one, the Grizzlies historically have been cautious with injuries, as I've mentioned before here on Locked On Grizzlies. The one exception to that appears to be John Morant, which maybe doesn't make a ton of sense because that's your franchise cornerstone superstar. You would think it would make more sense to be cautious with him, but he seems to always come back on an accelerated timeline from injuries, especially, things involving his ankle, that sort of stuff. Not the case with everybody else. And I would imagine Gigi, someone who has been invested in, a young player, they're going to be patient. Another reason is Memphis doesn't necessarily need him. And I've talked about that on recent shows. I'm going to talk about my vision for what replacing, in air quotes, Gigi Jackson looks like. You've got bodies in the aggregate. You've got Jake LaRavia. You've got, dare I say, John Conchar. You've got Scottie Pippen Jr. You've got dudes that can fill that void. You've got young players that can fill that void. And I think that matters. You have to understand that. You've got guys like a Jalen Wells, who you drafted and you signed to a full-blown contract. He's an NBA player. He's not a G League guy. He's an NBA dude to start. And he showed signs of being able to shoot the basketball at a pretty high level. It may not be to the same point of Gigi Jackson, give him 18 to 20 minutes a game. But if you have a true 10th man in the rotation now, it can vary based on what your team needs. We'll talk more about that later. But Memphis has so much depth that while, as I've said on recent shows, they're not better without Gigi, but I'm not sure they're worse either. I think they are built to withstand this loss and recover nicely, especially since it's happening so early in the season that they'll have a full training camp to figure out what it looks like without Jackson on the court. Not a concern long-term either. Dr. Young talks about how maybe he'll wear a different shoe to better support his foot, but this isn't something that is going to be career-threatening. Again, this is from the good doctor. Once you get it to heal, you should be able to go back on it full go without any detriments going forward, especially in a 19-year-old. He's physically strong. He's ready to go. Gigi is going to be just fine. I'm not worried. This article reinforced that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Make sure you're liking and subscribing as you do those things if you don't already do so. How worried are you about Gigi? Maybe put it on a scale of 1 to 10. 1, very little worry. 10, you're terrified. Again, I think I mentioned something similar in a recent episode. I'm at a 1. It was probably a 2 before, but after reading this great piece from DeMichael, the great interview with the doctor, I'm even less concerned than I was before. But let me know how you're feeling rotationally, Gigi long-term. Would you rush him back? Would you keep patience? Let me know what you're thinking in the comments. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. We've talked about FanDuel a lot, right? We talked about FanDuel a ton here on Locked On Grizzlies. I'm a big fan of FanDuel. I know DeMichael is as well, and you most certainly should be giving them a try if you have not already done so, because it's football time in America. We have something a little bit different for you with the new sports season getting started. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Make sure you're checking out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's Double Your Winnings all day on Sunday. This coming Sunday, September 15th, pre-game moneyline bets. Profit Boost will be live starting yesterday. So you should have already gotten on top of this. If you haven't already done so, you can do so through Sunday. View your account page now to learn more about the boost. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started with America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel.com. Check them out. So Gigi Jackson's not going to be there at the start of training camp. We already talked about that, right? That is something to keep in mind, keep an eye on. Not really going to work, right? Unfortunately, that's bad for Gigi. That's bad for everybody that's involved. For the Grizzlies, could be better. Zack Edy, who had some health concerns and issues during Summer League, nothing long-term, nothing serious. They were cautious with him, just like they're going to be cautious with Gigi. Zack Edy theoretically will be healthy. We're seeing videos of him working out with Ja and others. Exciting times. Another piece from our good buddy, co-host of Locked On Grizzlies, DeMichael Cole, took a look at where Edey was selected in the draft and compared him to similar centers in terms of draft position. There have been several, and this is from DeMichael's article. This article is entitled, "What Should Memphis Grizzlies Fans Expect from Rookie Zack Edy?" Here's what history suggests. Based on recent projections, right, Wendell Carter Jr., Miles Turner, Victor Wembanyama, Derek Lively, they have been looked at by DeMichael in this piece. How this works out for Edey comes in a couple of different ways. First off, opportunity needs to be there. And we already know that it is going to be there for Zack Edy because he is filling a pretty massive void, literally and figuratively, left behind by Steven Adams. He filled that void for Jonas Valanciunas before him. So Edey is going to have a chance to see significant minutes, especially for a rookie, 25, 28 minutes. That is most certainly on the table for him. And he is going to see opportunity to rebound. He's going to see opportunity to screen. He is going to be a part on both ends of the floor in terms of executing scheme. He matters a lot, maybe more than any other rookie on a team that is trying to contend right now and compete. Edey could be in the mix to be somebody like a Wendell Carter Jr. and Miles Turner, who did, both of them, average double-figure scoring as rookies. I think it's more likely that he averages double-digit rebounds than he does double-digit points because Memphis doesn't need him to be that scorer, right? We've talked about that a lot, and we'll continue to talk about that a lot. He can score, don't get me wrong. He has that physical ability to do so. We saw it at Purdue. But what they need him to do, what they need him to be, is a big man that screens and rebounds and defends. And he has that capacity. He's shown that. And that lines up nicely with a rookie like Derek Lively, right? Another productive player. Lively was a very impressive 8.8 points, 6.9 rebounds, 42 starts. Edey figures to see even more opportunity than that, assuming health. And I think that that is a good realistic barometer. Maybe you just flip the points. Maybe it's 6.9 points, 8.8 rebounds. That seems realistic to me. Edey comes in, and he's going to have a chance to play alongside some of the best players in the NBA. He's going to be next to Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., not having to carry so much of the load like a Victor Wembanyama, who obviously had success. But the fact that he doesn't have to be the first, second, or even third best player on the floor is going to be really helpful. But DeMichael does caution us, even though the numbers suggest that there is opportunity for Edey to have a strong rookie year, there are reasons that some of these bigs fail, right? Spacing, quicker pace, that can be an issue. And if you have seen Zack Edy, 7'4", 300 pounds, this is one of the reasons that I think that draftniks and people that thought this was a terrible first-round pick, They're assuming, and you know what they say about assuming, dear listener, dear viewer, that Zack Edy is not able to get out on the perimeter, not able to defend. He is not physically up to snuff. Testing at the combine suggests that is not an accurate statement. I would argue that watching him in Summer League, even though it was in limited spans and spaces, he is more nimble on his feet than he gets credit for. Obviously, Summer League is different than NBA regular season play. But I think Edey is not getting enough credit for the kind of athlete that he is. But there's no denying that he is going to be out in space against world-class athletes more than he ever has been before. How he's able to respond to that, and DeMichael says that in the piece, is going to be key to his development. A lot of the issues that big men have, they can be exposed in mismatches, switches on the perimeter, and the pick and roll. Edey has to find his footing and be able to understand where he can make up that ground. Because obviously, physically, he has the length and the size to be able to do that to an extent. But beyond that, so much of Edey's rookie campaign is going to be decided by how prepared he is mentally. Does he understand angles? Does he understand the right way to hedge up on a screen or how to retreat back to the rim and be able to protect the basket without fouling, to use his massive frame in ways that are going to make life difficult for a guard that's trying to drive around him and be able to time, whether it's a block or a contest, using that to his advantage because of his size, he's naturally going to be limited in that way. I don't have illusions of grandeur. De'Aaron Fox is going to be faster off the dribble than Zack Edy is running. Zack Edy is over a foot taller and probably weighs more than 100 pounds more. But that doesn't mean that Edey can't understand angles. That doesn't mean that he can't retrace his steps a little bit and find the gap and read things a little bit quicker to make up for those lost steps that he might have. Being a student of the game is a really significant part of that process. So if he's cerebral, if he gets in the film study room, if he buys into the process there, it will allow for him to make up whatever lost space he's going to have simply because he's not physically capable of being as fast as a guard, right? But I think that is an important point to make. Again, DeMichael says this at the end of the piece. Most of them show defensive potential, these bigs, but bigs who can expose those mismatches in a switch-heavy league are gold. Edey could be that lucky charm for Memphis. And Zach Kleiman has said that about Edey in the past. Yeah, Edey might struggle with a switch from time to time, but the opposite is going to be true. Opposing teams are going to struggle if a guard has to switch on to Edey. And what Edey has that Steven Adams before him did not is a pretty extensive ability offensively. He has phenomenal hands catching the ball. He's an excellent scorer, great touch at the rim. We've seen him dominate college basketball the last 2 years. Memphis doesn't need him to be that guy every time down the floor, but the fact that he can be that in spurts, especially in mismatch opportunities, that is going to be gold in terms of being able to get a stagnant offense going if it's necessary. So again, I rarely disagree with my partner. He makes interesting expectations, interesting comparisons. Seems like Derek Lively to me is the one that's most realistic. Again, maybe inverting the points and the rebounds. He's not going to have to be the guy from Purdue. He's not going to have to be that dude. All he has to do is come in and be a contributor as a screener, a rebounder, and a defender. And Memphis is bringing in somebody who is an experienced basketball player. He's not a project. He should be, in theory, good to go right now, and that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. So I'm excited to watch Zack Edy play this year. I've talked myself into him. As you know, if you're an everydayer, I was a Donovan Clingan guy. But I think that Edey's size, his ability to create mismatches, and the fact he's more nimble than he gets credit for, I think all that's going to add up for Edey and make for a really interesting rookie season for him. I think he's going to be an X factor like we talked about recently in the season for sure. I'm a big fan of Zack Edy. If you're not, you most certainly should be. Hopefully you're a big fan of Locked On Grizzlies, and this is your first listen or first watch each and every single day. Make sure you're making Locked On NBA your second listen, your second watch. All the great analysis and news and headlines from West Coast to East Coast and everywhere in between, covering the ups and downs and ins and outs of the NBA like no one else can. Make sure you're subscribing, liking, commenting, rating, reviewing Locked On NBA wherever you get your podcasts. Check it out after Locked On Grizzlies has concluded. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. I love learning. I would love to learn so much about how to play the guitar or how to speak Polish or how to ride a bicycle, right? I'm not the best at riding a bike. I'm a big guy. Leave me alone. I don't make time for that enough. I don't make time to learn. That's kind of lost as you get older. Kids are always learning and growing, but we lose that curiosity at times as an adult. What's something you'd like to learn? Maybe gardening. Maybe you want to beat your best friend in bowling. Therapy can help you reconnect with that sense of wonder because your back to school era can come at any given age. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover that curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today. Get 10% off your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We're going to finish out this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I talk about this every once in a while, all right? Whenever the opportunity strikes, I enjoy pointing out the positivity of unpredictability. And this Gigi Jackson situation, whether you thought he could have been the sixth-man scorer, bucket getter like I thought he could have been, whether you had more muted expectations of Gigi and you thought, hey, man, let's just get him on the court. Let's get him 12 minutes a game, 14 minutes a game. Like the bucket getting idea, but let's just keep him in the mix. Maybe you thought Gigi was going to fall out of favor entirely, right? I don't agree with that, but maybe that's what you thought. Gigi's no longer an option, at least not until December-ish, right? We talked about that earlier in the program. Patience is almost certainly going to be the virtue for Memphis with Gigi Jackson's foot injury. You've got options. And I think that Memphis would be wise to use them each and every time out. So let's refresh. Joe Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson Jr., Zack Edy. Those are almost certainly going to be your starters. Then you have Luke Kennard, Vince Williams Jr., Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark. Those are four pretty important reserve players. The Grizzlies could, theoretically speaking, just play 9 reserves, and that's a pretty stout group. You can piece together the 12 minutes of Ja Morant backup point guard minutes and go from there. Or if you wanted to extend things a little bit and get more guys in the mix, on a night-in, night-out basis, you can make yourself a difficult game plan for those 12 or so minutes that your 10th man would get. It doesn't always have to be Derrick Rose or Scottie Pippen Jr. I mentioned on a recent show how that would be the easiest thing to do. You put those guys out there, they eat those point guard minutes. You don't have to worry about Desmond Bane doing that. He can just be a shooting guard and a scorer, downhill Des. You don't need Luke Kennard to be that guy or Marcus Smart and forcing them to stretch themselves out maybe further than they should at this stage of their careers. Let them do what they do best. Scottie Pippen Jr., Derrick Rose makes sense. But are Scottie Pippen Jr. and to a larger extent Derrick Rose your 10th best player or your 10th best fit on any given night in terms of a rotation and a competition? To me, the answer isn't always going to be yes. And if that's the case, that allows for you to be in a place where you can play somebody like a Jake LaRavia, where you can play somebody like a Jalen Wells, who is, again, young player who has been given a full contract by the Memphis Grizzlies. It's possible he plays down in the G League some, but it's also possible he shoots the lights out from 3 and he's your 10th man. Imagine him out there next to Desmond Bane and Luke Kennard. That would be a lot of fun, a lot of offensive space to be had. There are players at the end of this rotation that make Memphis better in different ways, whether it's LaRavia and his two-way wing slashing combo forward kind of style, whether it is the intensity and the ball handling and creation of a Scottie Pippen Jr., the experience of a Derrick Rose. If you're an everydayer to Locked On Grizzlies, you know that I do not believe in Derrick Rose. So Michael Cole believes in Derrick Rose. You are a listener or a viewer who probably will get in the comments here soon and say, angrily typing as you go, why are you hating on D-Rose? Because he's not very good anymore. That's why. The numbers back that up. He shows flashes of what he's capable of, but so do most guards that are in his physical situation at his age. Doesn't mean I hate D-Rose. I would rather see Scottie Pippen Jr. get those minutes, an eventual roster spot. But Rose is in the mix. He's not going anywhere. And he does hold value as a traditional point guard that can help run the floor as that floor general. That has value too. Even a John Conchar, who's a jack of all trades, master of none sort of guy, he can go out there and give you minutes. He can rebound. If he ever decided to shoot the basketball, he could shoot it at a decent clip. He can move. He understands the scheme. He's been around for a while, the former Mastodon. You have options, and you can vary those options. We haven't even talked about Jay Huff, a versatile big that can shoot the three. Maybe you give him some of those minutes depending on the matchup, trying to get bigs away from the rim and making things easier in terms of your guys in dribble penetration. There's all sorts of flexibility that the Memphis Grizzlies can utilize through game-to-game end of rotation usage. I want to stress something. I'm cool with the 9-man rotation too. I'm not going to stand on a table and beat my chest for Jake LaRavia. Jake LaRavia, I think, deserves some opportunity. He has some skills, and Memphis is going to have to figure out what he's able to do. But is it going to be impossible to talk me into a world where Luke Kennard, Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark, and Vince Williams Jr. just play more? Of course not. We haven't mentioned Vince Williams Jr. as a guy who could potentially be a de facto backup point guard. He had experience doing it last year. It's one of the positives of last year. You got reps doing things like that. Vince Williams Jr. has that background. So if you go Vince Williams Jr., Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, or you take out Smart and put in Kennard, you have numerous secondary facilitators. Nobody that's a true primary facilitator at this stage of their career. But you have guys that can recreate it in the aggregate, at least theoretically. They can go out there, compete, get after it, and help one another create, not necessarily be that fulcrum, that tipping point. They don't have to be that guy that makes everything go. Memphis has one guy that's like that. It's Ja Morant. If I were Taylor Jenkins, and spoiler alert, I am not Taylor Jenkins, I would lean into the capacity to be unpredictable. Some nights, you need 9 guys. Maybe you're in the in-season tournament and you want to win just a little bit more so you can win the Emirates Cup or whatever the nonsense is called. Still very anti-in-season tournament. Maybe it's a game where you want to get more spacing on the floor, more size, more ball handling, more playmaking. From week to week, game to game plan to game plan, Taylor Jenkins and his staff have the ability to mix things up and not get into a rut with their rotations, which is very easy to do in basketball. You do it under the guise and disguise of wanting to have consistency. Sure, there's value in guys knowing their roles, but there's also value in within those roles having different lineup pieces together so that teams can't just load up and call out plays 80% of the time because they know which personnel groupings are going to run what kinds of offensive sets. I'm a fan of chaos. It's not ideal to have Gigi Jackson out, not by a long shot, but you know what you can do? You can use this opportunity to keep developing guys, and you can use it as a chance to find unique lineup fittings that on a random Tuesday in Indiana might be the difference between winning and losing. And Memphis needs to rack up as many victories as they can early in the season to establish themselves as a contender in the Western Conference. Thank you so much for hanging out with me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. We will be back on Monday talking all the news that broke in the NBA. We're also going to start recording, I believe it's 4 days a week starting on Monday, maybe even a 5 episode a week might be coming up. But we are going to start dropping more episodes. We're going to start getting into preseason form on our own end here on Locked On Grizzlies. I'm excited about it. I know DeMichael is as well. We have lots of great ideas, lots of great possibilities for content coming your way here on Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're liking, you're commenting, you're rating, reviewing, subscribing. Everywhere that you can get a podcast, you can do that here with us here at Locked On Grizzlies. Apple, Amazon, Spotify, YouTube. Audio, visual, do both. Make sure you're subscribed at as many places as possible and make us here at Locked On Grizzlies a proud part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time an episode drops. Make sure you're checking out Locked On NBA for your second listen, your second watch as we end today's episode. And again, make sure you're having a great weekend. Thanks for being with me here on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Until next time, I am Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in. Apple, Amazon, YouTube, Spotify, literally anywhere you get a podcast, we are free and available. Have a great one.